Okay, well, welcome to the December webinar, everyone. Very excited. We'll jump right in. So today we are going to be going over different updates and goals as usual, as well as bugs that have been fixed. And then our site spotlight today will be Cecilia and Holly showcasing some work that they are doing in their research group, which is very exciting. So jump in. So first off, we have some updates to Cortex, which is our data pipeline, and some enhanced visualizations that come with that. So all of that passive data that's being collected is now finally going to be displayed on the Prevent tab. And so the goal of this is just to optimize and streamline that tab to make it more interesting and interactive for different users. Here we have an example of what that will look like. So on the left, you can see what that graph would look like with consistent data. So the user's phone is doing a great job of catching all of that passive data it needs. And then on the right, we see some missing data. And so if something like this were to happen, or if there were to not be enough data, there would be a little note for the user right above where the graph should be that would say more passive data needed. And hopefully that would inspire people to reach out to their research coordinator, their clinician, just to kind of ask what's going on and how they can get that data and get these graphs. Does anyone have any questions about this? Great. So next we have localization and internationalization. So to help kind of get rid of some of the confusion that can come when people see a blank screen, we've added an empty tab message. So if there's nothing in the Learn tab or nothing in the Assess or Manage tab, instead of users thinking, oh, everything must be taking a really long time to load, now they'll see something that says not available, empty, there are no activities, contact your administrator for help. And then we have also added translations for Hindi and Spanish, which is very exciting. And just the beginning, we have lots of plans to add other languages. And then we've done a lot of work for activities and surveys and just ways to make things more customizable for clinicians and researchers. And some of the stuff we've done is added short answers, a rating scale where it's a lot more customizable. And then you can also change the custom icon for survey groups. Give me one moment, I'm just going to admit a couple others. Are there any questions so far? I realize I sped through those slides a little quickly. Great. And then finally, in terms of updates, we have updated Joule, so you can now change it from beginner, intermediate, advanced, expert. You can modify many different parts of the game. I would encourage everyone who's interested to go ahead and check it out because it has drastically changed. We have also added something called Markdown format for text and tips, and it will actually be coming soon for surveys and other managed activities as well. But this basically lets you make it look a little prettier, lets you have a little more control over how you customize it. And all of the information and a link to actually how to use Markdown and how to use that formatting can be found on our documentation page, which is docs.lamp.digital. And then finally, we have also added automatic question setting validations for certain question types. And so an example of this is before when a patient were to fill out a survey and the clinician had set it so a sliding scale was -1 to +1. If the patient selected -1, the whole app would crash. And we have fixed this now so the patient can only select an option that a clinician has set, and the clinician now has much more control of what the options they can choose are. So they can set it from -5 to +5, whereas before they were boxed into 1 to 5. Are there any questions about that? Awesome. And then finally, just to go over some of the bugs that we fixed recently, there was a problem with the breathe activity where the audio did not match the length of the exercise or vice versa. There was some issues adding different icons to surveys or activities, but that should be fixed as well now. And then finally, the activity and participant tabs of the management console are now displaying information correctly and in a timely manner. And so just a quick plug for anyone who is using this app, and if you ever experience any bugs, we highly, highly encourage you to submit a bug report. Again, that can be found at docs.lamp.digital, but it helps us out so much. And with that, we can move right into Cecilia and Holly's presentation. So I will turn this over to them. Just let me know when you want me to switch the slides.
Sorry, I was on mute. I actually made a quick update to one of the slides. Do you mind if I share from my own screen?
Not at all. Absolutely. Let me stop sharing right now. And then I will just make it so you can share. All right, go ahead and try now.
Okay.
I can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Oops. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. So is everyone seeing in the full slide or in presenter view? I'm just wondering here.
I'm not seeing anything. Is anyone seeing anything?
Sorry. Okay, is that working now?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, my name is Cecilia. I'm a research assistant at the Craney Lab, and I'm presenting today with my colleague Holly. And so today we're just going to be talking about some research that we're doing in our lab using the MINDLAMP app. So this is our lab, the Craney Lab. We are based out of Ottawa, Ontario in Canada, and we're located at the Royal Institute of Mental Health Research. And so we work under the supervision of Dr. Guimont, and we're also associated with the University of Ottawa. Just pass it over to Holly for a second. Oh. Holly, are you connected? Okay, maybe I'll take over this slide. So first of all, the benefit of using a smartphone app to measure cognition. So in current in-lab cognitive assessments, assessments are frequently limited to resources such as time and trained staff, and they also rely on retrospective self-reports. Smartphones are able to solve that issue by implementing daily and real-time reports for collecting not only cognitive assessment scores, but also symptom severity and measuring other different dynamic factors. And this is something that can be implemented into current clinical care routines. They're not only accessible, but also easy to use. And so they can benefit a large population. They can also provide access to cognitive assessments to people who may not typically have access to such resources, such as individuals who maybe have to pay out of pocket for such resources, or that don't live in close proximity to facilities that offer things like this. Now that we're in the COVID-19 pandemic, we actually see an even greater use for these assessments. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, smartphone apps are able to reduce in-person assessments and also reduce the spread of COVID-19 by doing daily and real-time tracking of cognitive performance over time. So we're going to be talking to you today about two different studies. So the first study involves using the MINDLAMP app to measure cognition in schizophrenia. And so goals of this project, first, we want to actually validate the MINDLAMP dual trails in measuring cognition in people with schizophrenia. We also want to look at differences between groups. So we looked at individuals with schizophrenia and compared them to healthy controls. So we want to see any clear-cut differences in cognitive performance between these groups. And then lastly, we wanted to explore some dynamic and longitudinal factors that may affect cognitive performance over time. So specifically, we looked at fluctuations in self-reported mood and sleep. And then we also looked at how size of screen, practice, and symptom severity might also affect cognitive performance on the JULES trials. So a little background about schizophrenia and cognition. Specifically, cognition is a core feature of schizophrenia and is frequently impaired in many individuals. Two cognitive domains that are frequently impaired are processing speed and cognitive flexibility. And these are both measured by the trail-making test. So processing speed is the relative time taken to complete a cognitive task. And some examples of this are simple decision-making, recognizing simple patterns and basic math. And this is also measured by the trail-making test A, and we hope that this can be measured by the JULES Trails A. And then cognitive flexibility requires the mental ability to switch between multiple concepts, but also simultaneously integrating these tasks. And some quick examples are card sorting tasks or the Stroop test, as well as the trail making test part B. And so this is a table shows the demographic and clinical variables in our studies. So we tested 26 individuals with schizophrenia, as well as 34 healthy controls. And neither of these groups differed in terms of age, sex, or smartphone use. And then in our schizophrenia group, we also looked at symptom severity as measured by the PANSS. So that's the PANSS total score, also the positive and negative syndrome scale. And then we also calculated the chlorpromazine equivalent for all antipsychotic medications our participants in this group were taking. And this is based on the equivalent oral dose of chlorpromazine. And then this kind of shows the timeline of our study. So we had a first in-lab visit, and then for 12 weeks, we asked participants to complete some surveys and cognitive tests, so the JULES Trails on the app. So we measured this for 12 weeks. So I briefly spoke about the trail making test, but this is kind of a gold standard pencil and paper measure. So there's a part A and B. So the part A is a measure of processing speed where participants need to connect the numbers in chronological order from 1 to 25. And then part B is a measure of cognitive flexibility, where they need to alternate between numbers and letters. So going 1A, 2B, 3C, and so on and so forth. And then the JULES trails are modeled after the trail making tests. So the JULES A measure of processing speed again, where participants, this time they just need to tap the numbers instead of drawing a line between them as seen on the trail making test. And then the part B is a little bit different. So on the JULES Trails B, participants need to alternate between two different shapes seen on the screen. So tapping each number, alternating between the two shapes. So this is a little bit different compared to the trail making test B. And then in our in-lab visit, we had a quick clinical interview. So we used the mini international neuropsychiatric interview to confirm a diagnosis of schizophrenia in our patient group. And then, of course, to confirm no diagnosis in our healthy controls. And then we used the positive and negative syndrome scale to measure symptom severity based on positive, negative, and general symptoms that are commonly experienced in schizophrenia. Then on the app, we asked participants to fill out a few self-report style questionnaires. So the first was based on mood. And this is an example of one of the questions that was seen. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, how was your mood today? And the participants used the scroll wheel function to select how they felt today. And then we also had a questionnaire about sleep. And so one of the questions on this questionnaire asked them to rate their last night's sleep on a scale of 1 to 10, again, similarly using the scroll wheel. And in both of these questionnaires, we also had some Likert scale style options. Okay, so this plot shows on the left the correlation between the Joules Trails A and the trail making test A, and then on the right, the correlation between the Joules Trails B and the trail making test B. And in both, we see significant moderate positive correlations in these tests. So this indicates that the Joules Trails A performs in a similar manner to the trail making test A, and same thing for the version B. And that this could be something that could be used to measure cognitive performance in people with schizophrenia. And we also looked at the test-retest reliability of the Joules Trails. So we measured this between two different time points. So time point 1 being the first in-lab assessment, and then time point 2 being the first time the participant completed the tests remotely. And so we saw quite significant but moderate test-retest reliability between these two time points, both on the Joules A and on the Joules B. We also saw quite low variance between groups across all time points. So this indicates that participants weren't really fluctuating too much. They were having similar scores over time. And then this graph shows differences between our two groups. So between schizophrenia and control groups, we noticed significant differences across all 4 tests. So on the x-axis, you see all 4 tests, so the trail making tests A and B, and then the Joules Trails tests A and B. And then on the y-axis, we have cognitive performance scores in seconds, where a greater score in seconds is actually worse cognitive performance, and then a lower score is better cognitive performance. And then interestingly enough, we also noticed that participants in both groups were completing the trail making test A significantly quicker than completing the Joules Trails test A. And then contrarily, they were completing the Joules Trails B faster than the trail making test B. So this is a bit of an interesting thing that we noticed, and it could be related to some of the differences between the smartphone app and pencil and paper modalities. So the fact that users need to tap on the numbers rather than draw a line, or also the differences between modalities in the part Bs. So with numbers and letters in the Joules Trails B, and then 2 different shapes in the Joules B. This could kind of explain some of these variations between completion times. And then we looked at some responses to survey questions on the mood and sleep surveys, and how responses to these questions might have affected their cognitive performance on the Joules A and B. So the first question we looked at was what I stated before, where participants were asked to rate their mood on a scale of 1 to 10. And for this, there wasn't so much of an effect on the Joules A, but on the Joules B, there was a bit of a trending significant effect where higher ratings of mood or better mood was related to better cognition on that day. And then the next question, today I feel good, when participants indicated that they felt good that day, there was quite significant results in that they had better cognitive performance on both the Joules A and B. And then quite similarly, if participants indicated that they felt happy that day, they tended to perform better on both the Joules A and B. Whereas if they indicated that they felt sad, they tended to have a bit of a lower cognitive performance. And then on the sleep questionnaire, when they're asked to rate their sleep on a scale of 1 to 10, on the Joules A, this was shown to have a significant effect, where a better rating of sleep was related to better cognition. But not so much of an effect on the Joules B here. And then another question on the sleep questionnaire. In the last 3 days, I've gotten up earlier than I wanted. And for this, I found it quite interesting that if participants indicated that they had gotten up earlier than they liked to in the last 3 days, they had better performance, whereas I kind of expected this to be the opposite effect. And then looking at some various other factors. So practice effects, we didn't observe any significant practice effects on either the Joules A or B. Symptom severity, a bit of some trending significant effects of symptom severity. So worse symptoms may have some sort of trending effect on the cognitive performance on Joules A and B. And then screen size was something we also explored. So size of screen does not seem to have any effect on how people are performing on these games. And then to conclude a bit, so MINDLAMP is not only a very novel tool to be used in cognitive assessments, but it's also accessible and reliable and valid in its assessment. And our results support the use of the Jules trails to be used in the assessment of cognition in people with schizophrenia. And we hope that it can be implemented into clinical care settings, as well as in research. We hope that people will replicate and expand upon our results. And very exciting, we're in the process of resubmitting this paper. So look out for a potential upcoming paper in the next upcoming months. Did anyone have any questions about this first study? No? Okay. If not, I will pass it on to my colleague Holly for.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, my internet was cutting out there at the start. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to be talking about our study using MINDLAMP again, but specific to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is allowing us to collect daily data, and so we can capture a more dynamic view of the impact of COVID, as it depends where you live and varies week to week. So this is a multi-site study. We are collaborating with Dr. John Torres. So first of all, we're hoping to further assess the feasibility and clinical utility of using a smartphone app, specifically in post-secondary students, as it relates to collecting both cognitive and mental health data. So in terms of the specific data we're collecting, our goal is to determine the impact of changes in mobility, having a pre-existing mental health diagnosis, and stress during the pandemic. We also have an exploratory aim of examining the relationship between reported mental health and problematic social media use. So for the study timeline, the majority of it is using the app, and we have 2 virtual visits over Zoom. So the first one, the initial visit is assessing the participants' eligibility and showing them how to download the app and going over the games. We also do a number of clinical assessments. After this, they use the app for a 4-week period. And then during the second Zoom visit, we go over the same clinical assessments as we did in the first visit. And then at this point, the participants have the option if they would like to continue using the app for an additional 6 months. So far we have completed both visits for 39 students. We have the demographic data so far. You can see the mean age is 20, and the majority of participants are female so far. Around half of them are Caucasian, and so far about half have a current mental health diagnosis. And of those who do have a diagnosis, depression and anxiety are the most common so far. So I'll just quickly go over the clinical assessments we are using. Quite a few of the questionnaires are overlapping with measures of Dr. Torres's lab. So we're starting off with questions on demographic and medical history. Here we are also recording the level of lockdown that the participant is experiencing where they're living. And then we have quite a few questionnaires just looking at overall mental health, well-being, and quality of life. And then we have some looking specifically at depressive symptoms as well. And for some more of the questionnaires, we are looking at anxiety symptoms and also some more broad measures of social functioning, perceived stress, and loneliness. And we are using the PSQI to measure quality of sleep. So I have 3 questionnaires here, and these are all specific to our site. So the first measure that we added is resilience. We're also using a modified version of the revised conflict tactics scale, to measure conflict at home pertaining to whoever the participant is living with. And in addition to frequency of social media use, we are also using the Bergen social media addiction scale to get a measure of problematic social media use. So for the games for a measure of cognition, we have 2 games. As previously mentioned, we are using the Joules game. This is just some screenshots of the Joules in MINDLAMP 2. And then we are also using the box game. So for those of you who don't know, for this game, the app will highlight a pattern of boxes, and the goal is to memorize this pattern and repeat it back by touching the boxes. And then there's also a Box Game Pro version where it is the same idea, except you're required to repeat the pattern back in reverse order that you're shown, which makes it a little bit more difficult. And for the in-app surveys, we have 6 different surveys that participants will complete daily, along with a weekly summary that's done every Sunday. So I'll go over a few of these. The first one is the mood survey, which has 9 questions pertaining to their mood, with an example here, and there's 4 different options for a response. We also have a sleep survey with 3 questions, and these are all about the quality of sleep for the past 3 days. So they cover falling asleep, staying asleep, as well as waking up. There's also a 7-item anxiety survey, which covers various questions about worrying, feeling anxious or irritable, or having trouble relaxing, things like that. And finally, we have a sociability survey with 7 items. So these are covering interactions with others, if the person has gone outside of their house or exercised. And here we also have a question again about social media, which asks how many hours they have spent on social media for that day. So in addition to these surveys, we're also using passive data. So there's GPS and accelerometer, which provide good data on a participant's mobility. And together with phone use and anonymized call and text logs, this gives a good snapshot of not only their mobility, but also social interactions that the participant is experiencing. So there's a lot of different data being collected, and we have a few main hypotheses based on goals of the study previously mentioned. So we're expecting with more strict social distancing measures in place that people with decreased mobility will have further decreased mental and cognitive health. Also, people with pre-existing mental health diagnoses are more at risk for negative impacts of COVID-19. So we're expecting that they will have further decreased mental and cognitive health outcomes compared to those who don't have a current mental health diagnosis. Also, such large changes in daily life, many people are experiencing higher magnitudes of stress. So with this increased stress, it is expected that they will also have further decreased mental and cognitive health outcomes compared to those who are showing more resilience. And for our exploratory aim of social media use, we are expecting that higher levels of not only frequency of use, but also problematic social media use will be seen in people who are showing these higher levels of stress and negative mental health outcomes. And that is all we have today. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, yes, Ms. Nikolai. I do have a question for actually for both studies. What were the challenges with the population? I know the first study for schizophrenia and the second study seems to be younger adults. Were there any challenges in using the app?
So I can speak a bit about the first study. With schizophrenia, there is quite a bit of research about attrition and dropout rates. So looking at comparing smartphone use and how often these participants checked in over the 12-week period, this was a bit lower in our schizophrenia group. But I think we kind of combated this with having just one in-lab visit. So participants were never required to come back to the lab, which I think definitely helps this out. But we still did see a bit more lower rates of check-in across the 12-week period in schizophrenia compared to the controls. But this is expected. But I think just one check-in per week, I think this does kind of help that out. We tried our best, but it's still something that we see in the end.
I agree. I think the check-ins are important. Our data is very preliminary for the students. The only thing that I did notice is some students would say when things got busier with school, say exam season, that they kind of neglected using the app a little bit more. So I think with this, again, the check-ins are important with that.
Okay. Follow up. I know you're in Ottawa, so were there any challenges with, or did you limit to English only, or did you also have French participants, French-speaking participants?
For the first study, we required participants to be English speaking.
Okay.
We didn't really have any issues where only French-speaking individuals were contacting us. That wasn't something that we experienced. But just at the time of our, when we first started collecting this data, a lot of our resources were only in English. So that's why we had to restrict to only English-speaking individuals.
Okay. Did you collect any data regarding the type of phone? For example, did you find any differences in Apple users versus Android users in their response, or in the way they communicate, etc.?
Yeah, that's super interesting. So we did collect the type of phone, and we did an analysis with the screen size. So with that, we found no significant differences. But that we didn't actually think about comparing Apple and Android. That's actually quite interesting. So maybe that's something we'll have to look at.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone else have any other questions?
I just want to say thank you to both of you for a wonderful presentation. That was so informative and just like great to see how you're using the app. So thank you very much. That was really wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity. It was great.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Awesome. Well, if there are no more questions, last chance for any questions about this, about updates. Otherwise, we will end the webinar. All right, everyone have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you.